Okay, so as you see here above is an image of an African man. He is called the Grimaldi in science. Now you look at him still up close. You see that he had his cheekbones, his broad nose, his curly hair. This is Grimaldi man, that's what they're claiming. And then at the bottom it says the Negroid of Grimaldi, a short race, perhaps the ancestors of the modern Bushmen, which once inhabited the French Riviera, restored according to the directions of Professor Rotot of Brussels by M. Maseru. Okay, and we know these are the ancestors. That's one of the ancestors of the French people. And here you have the Cone Capel man, an ancestor of some European nations, restored according to the directions of Professor Rotot of Brussels. Now look at him. He's somebody that they would have called an African. And he appears to have like straighter type textured hair. But look at that nose. His broad nose, high cheekbones, medium-sized lips. He probably was like, and this is his skull right here. All right. So this is the ancestors, another ancestors of the Europeans. Okay, this is forensic mock-up of Europe's first modern humans from the cave with bones located in Carpathian Mountains of Romania, 36,000 to 34,000 BC. Now he has what you would call an African, phenotype with the broad nose, high cheekbones. Okay, so you have him. And then right here you have the Cheddar Man. They say that he was a Mesolithic Britain's blue-eyed boy, but yet he have darker features. He has the dark complexion, straight hair, but blue eyes. So, which to me would say that he basically probably was of African descent, more than likely. Cheddar Man DNA shows early Britain had dark skin. It says a cutting-edge scientific analysis shows that a Briton from 10,000 years ago had dark brown skin and blue eyes. Researchers from London's Natural History Museum extracted DNA from Cheddar Man, Britain's oldest complete skeleton, which was discovered in 1903. It says a University College London team analyzed the genome and the results were used for a facial reconstruction. It underlines the fact that the lighter skin characteristics of modern Europeans is a relatively recent phenomenon. Let's go over that again. It says that the lighter skin characteristics of modern Europeans is a recent phenomenon. So, when you go back to the ancient days or the original Europeans, that these are how the ancestors look, that they had a dark complexion to them. Okay, and that they were probably, either they was indigenous. And then it says no prehistoric Briton of this age had previously had their genome analyzed. As such, the analysis provides valuable new insight into the first people to resettle Britain after the last ice age. The analysis of Cheddar Man's genome, the blueprint for a human contained in the nuclei of our cells, will be published in a journal and will also feature in the upcoming Channel 4 documentary, The First Brit, Secrets of a 10,000-Year-Old Man. Cheddar George tweet on early Britain. Cheddar Man's remains have been unearthed 115 years ago in Giles Caves located in Somerset's Cheddar Gorge. Subsequent examination has shown that the man was short, but by today's standards about 5'5" and perhaps died in his early 20s. Professor Chris Stringer, the museum's research leader, Human Origins, says, I've been studying the skeleton of Cheddar Man for about 40 years. So to come face to face with what this guy could have looked like, and that his striking combination of hair, the face and eye color, and that dark skin, something a few years ago we couldn't have imagined, and yet that's what the scientific data shows. The replica of Cheddar Man's skeleton now lies in the Giles Cave. Fractures of the surface of the skull suggest he may even have met his demise in a violent manner. It's not known how he came to lie in the cave, but it's possible he was placed there by others in his tribe. The Natural History Museum researchers extracted the DNA from part of the skull near the ear, known as the pterygus. At first, projected scientists Proof Ian Barnes and Dr. Selena Brace weren't sure if they get any DNA at all from the remains, but they were in luck. Not only was DNA preserved, but Cheddar Man was since yielded the highest coverage, a measure of the sequencing accuracy from a genome from the period of European prehistory, known as the Mesolithic or Middle Stone Age. It says they teamed up with researchers at University College London to analyze the results, including gene variants associated with the hair, eye, and skin color. Extra mature cheddar. They found that the Stone Age Briton had dark hair with a small probability that it was curlier than average, blue eyes, and skin that was probably dark brown or black in tone. It says this combination might appear striking to us today, but it was a common appearance in Western Europe during this period. Stephen Clark, director of Channel 4 documentary, said, I think we all know we live in times where we are unusually preoccupied with skin pigmentation. It says, Professor Mark Thomas, a geneticist from UCL, said it becomes a part of our understanding. I think that we will be much, much better thing. I think it will be good if people lodge it in their heads and it becomes a little part of their knowledge. Cheddar Man's genome reveals he was closely related to the Mesolithic individuals called Western hunters and gatherers, who have been analyzed from Spain, Luxembourg, and Hungary. Dutch artisans Alphonse and Audrey Kennis, specialists in paleontologic model making, took the genetic findings and combined them with physical measurements from scans of the skull. The result was a striking lifelike reconstruction of a face from a distant past. Pale skin probably arrived in Britain with the migration of people from the Middle East around 6,000 years ago. This population had pale skin and brown eyes and absorbed populations like the ones Cheddar Man belonged to. In other words, what it seemed like is that the people who came thereafter, they probably had mixed in and then bleached out the people that the Cheddar Man, was. Then it says no one's entirely sure why pale skin evolved in these farmers, but their cereal-based diet was probably deficient in vitamin D. This would have required agriculturalists to synthesize the essential nutrient in their skin using sunlight. There may be other factors that are causing lower skin pigmentation over time in the last 10,000 years, but that's the biggest explanation of most scientists to turn to. It says the genomic results also suggest Cheddar Man could not drink milk as an adult. This ability only spread much later after the onset of the Bronze Age. Present-day Europeans owe, on average, 10% of their ancestry to Mesolithic hunters like Cheddar Man. Britain has been something of a boom and bust story for humans over the last million or so years. Modern humans were here as early as 40,000 years, but a period of extreme cold as the last glacial maximum drove them out some 10,000 years. There's evidence that the Gauls Cave that hunters and gatherers ventured back around 15,000 years ago established a temporary presence when the climate briefly improved. However, they were soon sent back packing by another cold snap. Cut marks on the bones suggest that these peoples cannibalized their dead, perhaps as part of the ritualistic practice. Britain once again settled 11,000 years ago and has been inhabited ever since. Cheddar Man was part of this wave of migrants who had walked across a landmass called Doggerland that in those days connected Britain to mainland Europe. This makes him the oldest known Briton with a direct connection to people living here today. This is not the first attempt to analyze DNA from Cheddar Man. In the late 1990s, Oxford University geneticist Brian Sykes sequenced mitochondrial DNA from one of Cheddar Man's molars. Mitochondrial DNA comes from the biological batteries within our cells and is passed down exclusively from mother to her children. Professor Sykes compared the The ancient genetic information with DNA from 20 living residents of Cheddar Village and found 2 matches, including a history teacher, Adrian Target, who became closely connected with the discovery. The result is consistent with approximately 10% of Europeans who share the same mitochondrial DNA type. So in this article, it says why Europeans are 1/3 African. We may have all come from Africa, but Africa did not stop there. That's not true. It's obviously written by a European because they're trying to include everybody, but us American Indians, we know we did not come from Africa. We didn't migrate from Africa. We always have been here, and our remains are older than the ones that's in Africa. So, okay, so I had to correct that. It says it should be common knowledge by now that human beings in their modern form, Homo sapiens, first evolved in Africa. It says exactly when we emerged on the scene remains uncertain. Recent fossil discovery suggests it may have happened over 300,000 years ago, 100 millennia earlier than we originally thought, but whenever it was, most of our species' histories of existence would have played out in the so-called dark continent. It would have been no earlier than 70,000 years ago and possibly as soon as 55,000 years ago, when the ancestors of all people outside of Africa would have wandered out of the continent and colonized the rest of the habitable world. This would not have been the first dispersal of the hominid apes of Africa, mind you. See, now that's what they going into all that evolution stuff, which is not true at all. Because if that was the case, then you would still have monkeys today evolving, and you have some monkeys that's talking. You know, if that was true, so, so we know that's not true. But anyways, as much in the press has been made out of the fact that 1 to 7% of modern human ancestry outside of the ancestral continent comes from descendants of the earlier immigrants as Neanderthals and Denisovans. What may not be widely publicized, however, is that the famous South African migration between 70 and 55,000 years ago would not have been the last movement of Homo sapiens from Africa into Eurasia, which we know Eurasia is Europe and Asia. As if there is a fact of plethora of compelling evidence that humans from Africa continue to venture out and leave a permanent genetic marker on ancestry in Eurasian kin, even the white peoples of Europe. I don't mean a light dash either. Almost 1/3 of European ancestry descends from African admixture within the last 55,000 years. It says as early as 1997, population geneticist Luigi Lusa Cavalli Sforza observed in genes, peoples, and languages that the ancestry of Europeans could be characterized as 2/3 Asian and 1/3 African. More recently, Jeffrey D. Wall and colleagues reported in 2013 the East Asian population had a higher portion of ancestry from Neanderthal than did Europeans, since Neanderthals are known to have lived in Europe and the Middle East but not East Asia. It seems unlikely that the ancestors of East Asians had any more contact with Neanderthals than Europeans. It says it would, however, make sense if the portion of Neanderthal ancestry of Europeans got driven down by admixture with people with little to no ancestry, namely people from Africa. In 2012, a population of geneticists, blogger with the Sunon Ethiohelix, ran an ancestry of almost 3,000 individuals around the world with the program Admixture, measuring how much of their ancestry was relatively recent African origin versus how much of it descended from the initial out of Africa migration. His results revealed that 28 to 29% of his European subjects' ancestry was recent African origin. This held true for European nationalities as different from one another as the Spanish, Italian, French, Slovenians, Lithuanians, and white American citizens from Utah. It says, in addition, African genetic haplogroups pop up quite often. In some European populations, for example, almost 25% of Greek men carry the original African Y chromosomal haplotype group E. That such discoveries would surprise most people of European descent is a given. It would certainly be ironic, even the infamous history of white supremacists or white nationalists or alt-rightists, whatever euphemism they want to be called these days, decrying racial miscegenation and non-white immigration as threats to Western civilization. However, even those who don't prescribe to the ideological racism might still wonder how this African ancestry would have entered the European gene pool. It says this forensic reconstruction of a man who lived in the area of Jericho, Israel, about 9,500 years ago during the Neolithic period. His people would have inherited recent African ancestry, with his descendants bringing into Europe after the farming technology. It says back in 1971, physical anthropologist J. Lawrence Angel wrote in The People of Lerna that the skeleton remains of Neolithic peoples in Greece and Macedonia showed Negroid physical traits common to African people, which he speculated had arrived in the region from the Nile Valley of Egypt and Sudan. More recently, in 2005, the Loring Brace claimed that the remains of the prehistoric Middle Eastern people called Natufians, among the immediate predecessors to the first farmers in the Fertile Crescent and then Europe, showed unexpected ties to African populations. Such ties between the Natufians and the African population may not be limited to skeletal features. Archaeologists such as Afri Bar Youssef and Graham Barker describe the primitive tools of the Natufians used as similar to those of the earlier population amongst the African North Coast, even speculating that these similarities could attest to African technological influences, if not a full-blown migration, if the skeletal and archaeological data hinted a recent African admixture in the first farmers of the Fertile Crescent and their European offshoots. Later genetic data from remains showed these will confirm it, even if the geneticists haven't always realized it. Okay. Then I'm going to skip down to what it says common sense alone imply that this so-called basal Eurasian component must actually be African. After all, it is indigenous peoples of Africa, not anywhere else in Eurasia or the rest of the habitable world, who little to no Neanderthal ancestry. Okay, so then it goes, them skipping down. It says Northeast African ancestry is genetically closer to that of non-Africans than is ancestry from, say, West and Central Africa. The ancestry of Aboriginal peoples from the southernmost Africa who speak Khoisan languages is the furthest removed of all. Okay, so that's that article, and it's from Medium. And here's an image of the Etruscans, who are the ancestors of the Romans. Okay, so on here it says Albinism in Africa as a Public Health Issue by Esther S. Hong and Hojo Zib and Michael H. Ripa Coley or something like that. Anyways, it says here, the abstract says, I guess it's pronounced Oculocotinus albinism, OCA, is genetically inherited autosomal recessive condition, and OCA2, tyrosine positive albinism, is the most prevalent type found throughout Africa due to the lack of melanin. Okay, so you have that, which basically, this is something that is prevalent in the African continent. So this gene, so I'm thinking that more than likely that the people who migrated from Africa to Europe, that they had this particular gene, and that's the reason why their skin was pale, because they originally said that the Cheddar Man okay, so the Etruscans, the origins of the Etruscans occupied the region north of Rome between Arno and the Tiber rivers to the west of the Apennine Mountains. The Romans were first a subject people of the Etruscans and later their conquerors. The Etruscan culture was well developed and advanced, but distinctively different from the cultures of the other peoples in the region. This distinctive difference immediately led to the question of whether the Etruscans originate. And it says this question was subject of active speculations amongst the Greeks. Some Greeks held that the Etruscans were a branch of the Pelasgians, the aboriginal inhabitants of the Aegean region. Others, such as Virgil, had thought that they came from Leda, a kingdom of western of Anatolia. The Greek master historian Herodotus also ascribes the origin of the Etruscans to Leda. Herodotus says the ancestors of the Etruscans were forced to immigrate from Leda because of 18 years of hard times. And so I'm going to leave it there. So they said that they was like a aboriginal people. And we know most of the time, you know, like Malcolm X said, when they talk about aborigines, or you hear that term, they're talking about people of that's considered as black or considered as Negro when they write about them in history. So there you go. And then when you look at the definition of white people, it says a racial classification. It says used mostly, often, exclusively for people of European descent. Depending on context, nationality, and point of view, the term has at times been expanded to encompass people of Middle Eastern and North African descent. Okay. Let's see.